So a microcredential is a piece of a system, which badge of any sort of variety, or can also be something that goes in a portfolio. The idea is that it's the idea of, or an item that proves that you have achieved mastery in something. And sort of what we're playing with is the idea of what that looks like, and at different grade levels, what has meaning for students. And so that could be a badge that shows a badge or a microcredential that goes on your personal portfolio, or it could be for a fifth grader, it might actually be a literal badge that they get. But either way, the idea is that it's a sense of achievement, of mastery in whatever it is that the badge is for.
Can you explain how you've used microcredentialing with your partners?
Yes. So in this last year, can I tell you the story about how we are using it? So in this past year, in going into this year thinking about how we best work with high schools with Vermont Youth Climate Leader, or Vermont Energy Education Program, we realized that we weren't necessarily supporting students in achieving the highest level of success on their projects all the time, and recognizing that sometimes that we had sort of basically a pretty big ratio of unsuccessful projects. And so we reflected a lot about sort of why that was happening. And so one of the things that we came to was that understanding of not just students, but students and teachers in high schools and administrators even, they don't necessarily know how to do an energy project, and that there are all these skills that students, teachers, administrators don't necessarily have. And so where this went was recognizing that some of these skills might be communication skills, they might be project management skills. And so we then recognize that these are transferable skills, and suddenly things started to pop in our brains about, okay, so these are transferable skills. We know that students are doing these projects outside of their classroom and their classroom learning, and there is so much learning that's involved in it, and how do we encapsulate all the work, all of the real, genuine, hard work that is related to transferable skills that students are attaining by doing these projects. And so we met with Susan from Tarrant and decided on trying to create a badging or microcredentialing platform in order to create a place where students could categorize the skills that they're attaining through these projects and align them with proficiencies and help them to categorize them and then add them to their portfolios in terms of helping to meet their graduation requirements. And so the whole story behind it is how to make these projects and the real out of classroom learning and that students are achieving through this as part of their learning that happens inside the school as well. So we have badges and we have microcredentials, and this is sort of different terminology, but the point is that this is a multi-dimensional idea where you have things that build on each other. And so you have this end badge, we could say, or credential, and then we have these micro pieces. And so a microcredential is a piece of this larger pie, and sort of where this fits in, or rather this larger goal, and where this fits in with the whole system in terms of what we are hoping a microcredential really is it's a sign of a level of mastery or approaching mastery in whatever that microcredential is. And so that could be, so for us, we've chosen transferable skills. And so going off of the Agency of Education's standards for exactly their verbiage, so we've borrowed those. So for instance, one example of one of our microcredentials is in clear and effective communication. And so, for us, our example of a badge versus a microcredential is our badge is a Youth Climate Leader badge. But in order to show that you are a Youth Climate Leader, you achieve these badges on these smaller scales that are your microcredentials that then add up to this main badge. In my mind, the role that microcredentialing can play is creating a place to organize and categorize this learning. And so for us, we're using Badgelist as the platform, and we chose Badgelist because it has a way for students to upload their evidence, and their evidence is attached to their badge. So they have evidence of their proficiency in their transferable skill, and then they own this badge, and they can do whatever they want with this badge or this micro-credential. It's a sort of an organizing platform that students can own that shows the skills that they've achieved and the proficiency that they've achieved. And then when it's also related to their graduation requirements, you can share this badge, and as part of this badge, the evidence is attached right to it. And so you don't have to do double the work. It's already a place that you've organized the learning that you've done through your personalized learning, which is part of Act 77, and aligned it with your graduation requirements and your proficiencies.
So what are your hopes for the use of microcredentialing in schools?
So my hopes are that by creating a platform and sort of I'll back up a little bit, because some of our greater hopes are that we're not the only extended learning opportunity provider who would be interested in doing this. And the hopes, so there's two different levels of hopes. There's hopes with my VPAD on, and then there's hopes as just somebody who really wants to support really good learning across the state. And as somebody who, as an educator, who really just wants to help support really good learning across the state, the hope is that by creating or helping to share the idea of badging and microcredentialing with other extended learning opportunity providers, that we can together as a community create a way for students to be able to access these opportunities more broadly and be able to apply them to the systems that are in their schools that give them credit for their learning opportunities. And credit meaning lots of things in terms of proficiencies, in terms of credit for not necessarily credits, but credit for the mastery that they're achieving, and really for their efforts also. And so with my VPAD on, in terms of the VEEP perspective, my hopes for this is, for badging and microcredentialing, is really to help support energy and climate projects in every single possible way. And so part of that is helping to create space for students and teachers to give the weight and, like I said, the space to these projects that they deserve, because there's so much learning that happens in them, and so a way to sort of quantify and qualify the learning. So.
What advice would you give to someone who is interested in implementing microcredentialing in the classroom? So the advice that I would give is that every teacher usually plans using backwards design, and so for someone so if I'm talking to a teacher about how to implement, I would think about just reminding them to use their backwards design in terms of what they really want students to know, understand, do, all of those things. And one of the things that we did that I think is really helpful is really just being grounded in what students are being asked to show. And so for us, that was being grounded in transferable skills. Teachers are constantly innovating and creating new things and making things better and better. So in an ideal first year, there would be a platform, and slowly easing into it and getting used to the idea of using microcredentialing and badging. One of the beautiful things about it is that it makes where everyone is very transparent. And so using all of those aspects of proficiency-based learning, where the students are owning their pathway, and they're seeing where they are in terms of achieving mastery in these different areas. And so I would say that an ideal first year is having a pretty good skeleton and sort of testing things out as they go, and then and then once again editing feedback and revising and whatnot. One of the things that I didn't mention that's really key that happened at Montpelier High School, that is part of how this whole, as Susan Hennessy calls it, the ecosystem of what works for badging and makes badging successful, is that idea of the parts of so the ecosystem is you have your badge earner, which are your students, and then you have your badge issuer, which could be us. It could be it could be your instructor. It could be your instructor in or outside of a classroom, right? So it's that person who's actually assessing and issuing the badge based off of the evidence that you provided for whatever skill you're trying to show. And then the other piece of it is sort of that outside, that outside viewer. And so an important part of what happened or what is happening with our pilot at Montpelier High School is talking with administrators and saying, is this a valuable thing? Does this have value for your students, and what is that value? So some of those values that we think about is, okay, so if you're going to go off to college, maybe this badge should go in your transcript. And as I mentioned before, your evidence is attached to it. And so for some students, that has value. And so if we also get buy-in from the whole student body, including administrators, that other value is that when you go to have your student-led conference, there is intrinsic value for you in that you have already organized your evidence to show in that student-led conference. And your administrators have said, yes, this is a great way for you to organize your learning and for you to present it. And so in terms of thinking about, where are these other places that badges have value? And that looks like a very different thing for a fifth grader sometimes than it does for 11th or 12th grader who's looking at graduation requirements and sort of thinking about that as teachers, administrators, whomever, extended learning opportunity providers are creating these badges, thinking about who creates that added value from outside of just the student learners and then the issuers. So who's going to see it, and what do you want it to look like?